Rita Skeeter had always been the kind of journalist who drew attention. Her acid green quill, her gemstone-studded spectacles, and, of course, the dramatic scarlet lipstick that accentuated her smug, knowing smile. She relished in scandal, breathed life into rumors, and could twist a half-truth into a searing controversy with just a few strokes of her quill. People whispered that even the crisp parchment she used seemed to recoil from her touch. Yet there was another rumor far darker, lingering in the margins of the wizarding world. Perhaps Rita Skeeter's thirst for secrets went beyond petty gossip. Perhaps she didn't just report stories. Perhaps she shaped them, feeding them to shadowy forces. From her vantage point at the top of the twisted turret of the Daily Prophet offices, Rita peered at the skyline. Hogsmeade was miles away, Hogwarts beyond that, but she imagined she could sense the thrumming magical energy from the castle. To the wizarding public, Hogwarts was the bastion of youth and hope, the school that molded bright, fearless witches and wizards. But Rita's perspective was different. In that school, potential threats to the Dark Lord were nurtured. Many called he who must not be named a relic of a darker time, best forgotten. But Rita knew better. He was real, he was rising, and she had placed her journalistic talents at his disposal. No one suspected her. No one thought a gossip reporter, so obviously opportunistic and always chasing sensational headlines, would truly stoop to the darkest side of magic. Sure, her cruelty was well documented. Her quickness to manipulate an interview or sow rumor for personal gain was infamous. But to be a Death Eater? That was unthinkable. Her mask of self-serving ambition proved surprisingly good cover for the deeper evil that pulsed in her carefully hidden mark. Because yes, she had won. A smoldering tattoo, hidden beneath layers of shimmering illusions, pressed into the flesh of her forearm. It had been burned there during a dark ceremony months before the wizarding world even suspected the second rise of Lord Voldemort. She recalled the swirl of black robes, the hiss of incantations, and the slight sting as the Dark Lord's wand touched her skin. All for a promise. "You shall be our eyes and ears in public," he had said in a voice that slithered across her mind like a serpent. Rita's greatest skill lay not in dueling or potions or curses, but in words. She was Lord Voldemort's propaganda machine, but more importantly, she served as a hidden funnel of information. Who better to feed the Dark Lord details about the comings and goings of Hogwarts' greatest talents? Harry Potter, Hermione Granger, and countless others, than a reporter with daily access to every nook and cranny of wizarding gossip. That morning, the crisp February wind rattled her office window. Parchment clippings were scattered across her desk. Articles about Dumbledore's rumored alliances, speculations on Harry Potter's courage, and new tidbits on the eccentric staff of Hogwarts. Taking a seat, Rita dipped her quill into the inkwell, vibrant green ink swirling like venom. She began a fresh piece on recent events at the castle. However, this draft would never see the pages of the Daily Prophet. This one was for a very particular set of eyes. The spelled green quill scribbled across the parchment, forming a coded message that only another Death Eater, or perhaps someone well-versed in the dark arts, could interpret. It was mesmerizing how each letter seemed to twist and coil. Dumbledore's trust in Hagrid remains unwavering. The half-giant has befriended an unusually large creature near the forest's edge. Rita paused. She needed to mention Hermione, too, or the Granger girl, as Lord Voldemort had specifically instructed, so she pressed the quill's tip again. The Granger girl displays extraordinary intellect beyond her years. She is delving into advanced protective charms. Potential threat, recommend constant surveillance. Then the final strokes. Potter remains unaware of the deeper layer of infiltration within Hogwarts. She blew gently on the ink to dry it, a chilling satisfaction coursing through her as she rolled the parchment into a tight scroll. She muttered a faint incantation, just enough to obscure the text, and slid it inside a small black envelope. Reporting was her trade, and she prided herself on thoroughness. Every secret, every rumor, every personal tension was fair game for the Dark Lord. By noon, the letter would be on its way to a nondescript location via a discreet, dark-feathered owl, no signature needed. And by nightfall, Lord Voldemort would read Rita's words by candlelight, fingers drumming the arm of a high-backed chair in satisfaction. Rita Skeeter's animagus form, a garish, jewel-green beetle, had once been a closely guarded secret that gave her the perfect advantage. She could slip between cracks in window panes and eavesdrop on the unsuspecting. When Hermione Granger discovered her secret 2 years prior, Rita had believed her advantage was lost forever. Yet, cunning as ever, Rita negotiated a truce of sorts. As long as she didn't print slander about Harry and his friends, Hermione would keep quiet. But the vow Rita had made to the Dark Lord overshadowed all others. She never truly abandoned her insect form. She just became more cautious. Over the following months, she refined her animagus illusions, layering them with protective enchantments. Now, not only could she eavesdrop, but she could do so while under a second disillusionment charm. Even if an eagle-eyed student suspected a stray beetle creeping along the corridor, they'd hardly glimpse her. So, on a chilly winter afternoon, Rita found herself perched atop the tall windowsill of Hogwarts' Great Hall, invisible and in her beetle form. Below her, the throng of students chattered about upcoming exams, Quidditch strategies, and, of course, the never-ending gossip around Harry Potter's heroics. A hush fell occasionally when a professor swept by, McGonagall with her stern expression or Snape with his trademark glare. Rita's tiny beetle legs clung to the stones. The vantage point was perfect. A swirl of conversation about Hermione's recent row with Ron Weasley floated up from the Gryffindor table. To Rita's surprise, she heard mention of something new. A clandestine defense association that continued even after Dolores Umbridge's departure, though apparently more covertly. Hermione, it seemed, was the brains behind many new protective spells. She was teaching complicated hexes, disarming charms, and jinx counters that even some 7th years struggled to master. So Hermione was stepping into an instructor's shoes. A remarkable development. Rita's tiny antennae twitched with excitement as she recorded every word in her memory. That night, upon returning to her normal form, she would scribble it all down. Her mind was a steel trap for such details. The Dark Lord would be quite interested in these extracurriculars. Crawling further along the windowsill, Rita also zeroed in on Draco Malfoy, who was seated at the Slytherin table. Despite Draco's father being a known Death Eater, Rita had gleaned from bits of rumor that Draco might be wavering in his allegiances. That was delicate information, and Rita intended to monitor it. If Draco were to betray the cause, the Dark Lord would want to know. A flurry of wind ruffled the Great Hall's enchanted ceiling as the lunchtime owls swooped in to deliver mail. Brown packages and letters dropped into laps and outstretched hands, laughter filling the space. For a moment, Rita felt a prick of worry. Her black-feathered courier owl was among them, probably carrying her coded message right now to some hidden den. If by chance it were intercepted, well, she didn't want to consider that. No, she had spelled the envelope carefully. It would be just another piece of unremarkable parchment among hundreds, presumably some commercial pamphlet or subscription renewal. Yet the danger was real. She was at Hogwarts in beetle form, gleaning secrets. If she were discovered now, she would lose not only her career but quite possibly her life. She pressed her wings tighter against her shell. A fleeting sense of dread passed over her. But after years in this double life, Rita had become an expert at swallowing fear. She scuttled along the cold stone until she reached a small gap near the staff table. There, she listened to snippets of conversation among the teachers. She recognized the voices of Professors Flitwick, Sprout, and Trelawney. Mentions of random classroom anecdotes drifted up, but her ears pricked at the mention of Dumbledore's personal schedule. "He's meeting an old friend from the ministry next Monday," Flitwick said in his high-pitched voice. Something about a new protective measure. Rita stored the detail away. Perhaps the Dark Lord might time an attack around that meeting. Who knew? She just had to pass it on. Her job was not to question or second-guess. Her job was to relay details, sow confusion when needed, and keep the Dark Lord's insatiable curiosity sated. And so, that was how she spent the afternoon. An invisible bug at the heart of Hogwarts, gleaning intelligence for the darkest wizard of the age. It thrilled her, in a twisted way, To be so close to these unsuspecting children, teachers, and staff. Knowing that her quill would soon lash the truth into coded words that would find their way into the Dark Lord's hands. Rita's published articles were always flamboyant, borderline defamatory, and occasionally downright cruel. Behind that veneer, she knew exactly when to spin a piece to cloak her true agenda. If she needed the wizarding world to pay attention to some trivial scandal, thus distracting them from the Dark Lord's real maneuvers, she would write scathing exposés on minor topics. Her most recent piece was titled Harry Potter's Headstrong Recklessness: The Truth Behind the Tri-Wizard Champion's Temper. It was classic Rita, insinuating that Harry was out of control, that Hogwarts was coddling him, and that Dumbledore was too soft to keep the boy in check. The piece was filled with half-baked quotes and dramatic insinuations. It flared up on every wizard's breakfast table, overshadowing more crucial developments in the background. While the wizarding public squabbled over Harry's alleged attitude, the Dark Lord's carefully orchestrated movements went largely unnoticed. And it wasn't just about Harry. She penned strategic hit pieces on Hermione Granger's rumored haughtiness and the intellectual tyranny of the top students. She fabricated exclusive interviews with upset classmates who complained about Hermione's know-it-all demeanor. It was cheap, petty, and unsavory, but it served a purpose: sowing discontent, fueling Hogwarts' internal conflicts, fragmenting alliances that might one day unite against Voldemort. After each publication, Rita waited for the inevitable wave of hate mail. Screech owls arrived in droves at the Daily Prophet, along with the occasional howler threatening to hex Rita if she kept insulting the boy who lived. Public condemnation never bothered her much. It was part of the show. As long as she had her devoted readership, her editor's grudging acceptance, and most importantly, the Dark Lord's approval, she was invincible. Late one night, she slipped into a small, dimly lit pub on the outskirts of Diagon Alley, the Faded Phoenix. The bartender, a heavy-set wizard with watery eyes, paid no attention to her as she settled into a corner booth. From under her fur-lined cloak, she withdrew a small, enchanted mirror. On its surface, she saw the reflection of a masked face, though the angle was skewed, as if the figure was half in shadow. "Report," came the voice. It was smooth, yet hollow, a modulated tone the Dark Lord's intermediaries used. Rita recognized it. She pressed her wand tip to the mirror's edge, completing the connection. Dumbledore might be leaving Hogwarts next week. "Meeting with a ministry contact," she murmured. "And there's more. The girl, Hermione Granger, is building a small band of students, training them in advanced defense. They're quite potent. The rumors are they practice in the old classrooms on the 7th floor." Pause. "And Draco Malfoy? Has he faltered?" Rita lowered her voice, mindful of the pub's quiet patrons. "I cannot confirm. He keeps to himself. But I suspect he's resentful of being overshadowed by Harry. Envy is a powerful motivator. He might remain loyal after all. Still, he's not as enthusiastic as I'd expect from a Death Eater's son. Caution is advised." The masked figure nodded slowly. "The Dark Lord will find a way to test him. Carry on. And do not fail." The mirror went dark. Rita exhaled, slipping it back into her cloak. Fear rippled through her. Even behind that blank mask, she sensed the looming threat. The Dark Lord's wrath was legendary. Her illusions and cunning words would not save her if she disappointed him. Yet a twisted sense of pride fluttered within her. She was needed, her cunning, her subterfuge, her ability to spin an entire wizarding populace into a tangled knot of confusion. In her mind, she was no mere reporter. She was the puppet master of rumors, feeding the narrative to both sides. But she never lost sight of her real goal: ensuring the Dark Lord's triumph, piece by whispered piece. On a Wednesday afternoon, Hermione Granger sat in the Hogwarts library, a fortress of high shelves and musty tomes. She should have been engrossed in her ancient runes assignment, but her mind kept drifting. Something felt wrong in the castle. Whispers of a spy, people catching glimpses of shapes in corridors, strange rumors in the Daily Prophet, things that no outsider should have known unless they were physically present to overhear. She stared at a rolling headline from the latest edition: Exclusive, Hagrid's secret menagerie. What exactly is the half-giant hiding? The article went on to reveal details about Hagrid's newest pets and even cited a snippet of private conversation between Hagrid and a certain second-year student. It was a conversation Hermione knew had occurred just days before, behind closed doors near the staff corridor. How had Rita Skeeter gotten that story? Hermione's brow knitted. She closed her book with a snap. She remembered how she had once caught Rita Skeeter in beetle form, how the journalist had hovered around private conversations. And she remembered the vow they'd forced upon Rita. "Stop writing slanderous articles about Harry and me," Hermione had demanded, "or I'll reveal your illegal animagus form." For a while, Rita had backed down. Yet lately, the articles had returned, nastier than ever. Hermione suspected Rita had either found a new way to hide her animagus form or had grown so emboldened that she no longer cared about the threat. She closed her eyes, replaying the puzzle pieces. The slant of Rita's articles, the suspicious timing, the infiltration rumors that Dumbledore himself had quietly shared with the most trusted members of the Order. A realization began to form, a suspicion so grim Hermione almost dismissed it outright. Could Rita Skeeter be in league with Voldemort? She recalled that after the Triwizard Tournament, rumor had it that Lord Voldemort had returned, though the Ministry tried for the longest time to hush it up. Rita had been one of the few reporters who alternately tried to discredit Harry's eyewitness accounts, then fanned the rumor for sensational headlines. The inconsistent coverage made sense if she was deliberately muddying the waters, confusing the public, sowing doubt. Hermione felt her pulse quicken. She gathered her books, stuffed them into her bag, and hurried to find Harry and Ron. If her hunch was correct, they needed to set a trap. In a disused classroom near the 7th floor corridor, the three friends convened. Moonlight streamed through the dusty windows, illuminating old desks, chairs, and a worn chalkboard that was half erased with scribbled notes on basic charms. "Rita Skeeter, a Death Eater," Ron repeated, his eyebrows shooting so high they nearly met his hairline. "Hermione, that's crazy," Harry finished for him, though his tone was measured. He had heard enough wild twists in his life to never dismiss anything outright. "But you do have a point. The articles are getting oddly specific. And it's not just the smear campaign. She's describing things no normal reporter should have access to." Hermione nodded, pacing in front of them. "We know she's an unregistered animagus. We know she uses that to eavesdrop. But we also know there might be a more direct link to Voldemort." She took a breath. "Let's assume it's true. How do we catch her?" Ron fiddled with his wand. "We could set up a decoy conversation with false information." "If she's bugging us," Hermione snapped her fingers. "Exactly what I was thinking. We stage something so juicy she can't resist. Something that would be of great interest to Voldemort." Harry's green eyes lit up with understanding. "We feed her a story about me, about some secret weapon or crucial vulnerability that the Order discovered. But it has to be believable." "Right," Hermione agreed. "Then we watch for her. If she shows up in beetle form, we capture her again. And this time, we see if we can reveal her mark." Ron's mouth went dry. "Her mark? You really think she—" Hermione nodded grimly. "We need to see if she has one. That would confirm she's a Death Eater." Plans were set. They would ask Ginny, Neville, and Luna to help spread a rumor about an upcoming secret mission to retrieve a powerful artifact. Something that could theoretically tip the scales against Voldemort. They'd place the rumored location in the Forbidden Forest at a specific time. If Rita truly was funneling information to the Dark Lord, that location might become compromised. The next day, the rumor was planted discreetly. Whispers circled the Gryffindor common room, made their way into the Ravenclaw reading nook, and spread to a few Hufflepuffs. Everyone was told not to mention it to outsiders, but in a way that guaranteed half the castle would overhear. Rita Skeeter, if she was around in insect form, would definitely catch wind. The night of the planned mission arrived. Rain lashed the windows, and a cold wind howled across the Hogwarts grounds. Perfect cover for a stealth operation. Harry, Hermione, and Ron slipped outside, heading toward the Forbidden Forest. They were joined by Luna Lovegood, who kept whispering about some fantastic creature she was sure resided in the forest, though no one was entirely sure if she was serious or playing along with the ruse. The idea was to make a show of it. Lanterns in hand, conversation about Dumbledore's tip, hushed references to the artifact. Anyone eavesdropping would think they were about to make a crucial retrieval. Every so often, Hermione would flick her eyes toward the silhouettes of the trees, searching for a glint of green or the subtle flutter of insect wings. Rain pattered on leaves, the air thick with the scent of pine. As they ventured deeper, Harry raised his wand, casting a faint lumos. The soft blue glow lit the path, flickering on the edges of their anxious faces. Then, Ron jerked his head, speaking quietly. "Over there. Did you see that shape?" Luna squinted. "Might be a Raxpert." Hermione pressed a finger to her lips. She saw it. A small glimmer, like a polished carapace catching the reflection of wand light. Just for a split second. Then it was gone. They continued, making sure to keep their voices at just the right volume, as if they were off guard. They spoke about the rumored artifact's location deeper in the forest, near a clearing by an ancient oak. All the while, Hermione was reciting a mental countdown. At the precise moment, she whispered, "Accio Beetle," and flicked her wand toward the shadowed edge of the path. A swirl of magical energy crackled through the air. The others joined in with detection spells, forming a net. For a heartbeat, nothing happened, just the hiss of rain. Then came a furious buzzing, and something small shot out from behind the gnarled root of a tree. A shimmering green beetle was yanked through the air, fighting invisible tethers. It tried to vanish into the gloom, but the combined magic of 4 wands was too strong. They forced the beetle into a conjured jar, magical wards sealing it tight. Instantly, the beetle's shape distorted, expanding in a swirl of limbs and fabric until Rita Skeeter lay sprawled on the wet forest floor, a look of rage and panic twisting her features. Her acid green quill fell from her hand. She tried to scramble away, but Harry had his wand trained on her. Ron circled around, while Hermione stood with a triumphant glint in her eyes. Luna held the jar, a little dazed. "Well, that's quite the transformation." Rita's face twisted into a sneer. She was drenched, mud on her robes. "You insufferable children," she hissed. "I should have known. Known better than to creep around?" Hermione shot back. "We suspected you. This time you won't slip away." Rita attempted to appear indignant, but her fear was palpable. She clutched her forearm protectively, the gesture not lost on Hermione. "Show us," Hermione demanded, stepping forward. "Show us your left arm." A flicker of panic crossed Rita's expression. "I've no idea what you're talking about, you meddling little." "Show us," Harry repeated, voice unwavering. Under the combined threat of 4 wands, Rita had no choice. With trembling fingers, she pushed up her sleeve. At first, the area was blank, until Harry and Hermione chanted a revealing charm. Like ink seeping through cloth, the dark mark rose to the surface of Rita's skin, a black skull and serpent that marked her as a Death Eater. Ron let out a ragged breath. "Bloody hell," he muttered. "She really is one of them." Harry's jaw tightened. Anger flared in his eyes, but so did a grim satisfaction at confirming their suspicions. Hermione felt a wave of cold wash over her. It was one thing to suspect, but quite another to see it. Rita sneered, though tears of fury glistened in her eyes. "If you think you can hand me over to Dumbledore without consequence, you are sorely mistaken. The Dark Lord rewards those who are loyal, and punishes those who would stand in his way. You should be the ones trembling." Harry gritted his teeth. "You're a traitor to everything decent in the wizarding world." Rita flung mud from her robes, rising shakily to her feet, but she was cornered by their wands. "And you think Dumbledore's saintly reputation will protect you from the wrath of the Dark Lord?" She let out a shrill laugh that bordered on hysterical. "I've already told him plenty about all of you, especially you, Granger. Your meddling intellect, your illusions of moral superiority. You're in over your heads. You cannot comprehend the tides that are shifting. but Hermione's eyes were steel. "We'll see about that, Skeeter." In the aftermath of the capture, Rita Skeeter sat bound to a wooden chair in an empty defense against the dark arts classroom, the door barred and windows magically sealed. Professor McGonagall stood at one side, lips set in a tight line. Professors Snape and Flitwick hovered in the background, both looking grave, while Dumbledore himself sat across from Rita with quiet, unyielding authority. Harry, Ron, and Hermione stood nearby, though their role now was mostly as witnesses. Outside, a thunderstorm raged, lightning illuminating the tall, narrow windows. The air in the room crackled with tension. Dumbledore surveyed Rita with piercing blue eyes. "I must confess, Miss Skeeter, I had hoped my suspicions were unfounded," he said softly. Alas, Rita's wrists squirmed against the magical ropes. "You can't make me talk," she spat, chin jutted forward. "I've done nothing illegal besides a bit of eavesdropping, which is hardly cause for." Professor McGonagall cut her off with a fierce glare. "The dark mark on your arm says otherwise, Miss Skeeter." Rita's face contorted, but she fell silent. Snape stepped closer, wand pointed at her. His voice was low, reverberating with the threat of legitimacy. "You have served the Dark Lord as an informant, yes?" She kept her mouth shut. Her eyes darted around, her breath accelerating. Dumbledore held up a hand, halting Snape. "Let us not force her mind open, Severus. Not yet. I suspect Miss Skeeter still believes her loyalty to Lord Voldemort is her best shield." Hermione clenched her fists at her sides. She remembered the vile articles, the manipulations, the near-ruinous slander campaigns, and now the real betrayal that dwarfed them all. She's been passing information on Harry, on all of us, for months, maybe years. Rita only smirked. "Information is power, Ms. Granger. One day, you'll learn that the pen really can be mightier than the wand." Dumbledore took a measured breath. "The Ministry will want to question you, perhaps even place you in Azkaban. But let me advise you, if you cooperate now, you may avoid the Dementor's kiss." A spasm of fear flickered in Rita's eyes, but she was trapped. She glanced at Harry, hatred brimming in her stare. "You lot have no idea what's coming. The wizarding world is on the brink of a new era. None of your moral posturing will stop it." Dumbledore stood, a sadness shadowing his features. "This conversation has run its course. Minerva, please see Miss Skeeter is confined while we prepare for the Ministry's involvement." As McGonagall and two Aurors stepped forward, Rita let out a hiss of protest. The ropes tightened, and she was escorted away, her furious gaze locked on Hermione until the door slammed shut. When the echoes of footsteps faded, the remaining group stood in tense silence. Ron let out a low whistle. "I can't believe it. I mean, I can believe it, but blimey." Harry pressed a hand to his forehead, thoughts swirling. "At least we stopped her from sending more information, but who knows how much she's already passed on." Dumbledore nodded grimly. "Indeed, we shall assume that she has compromised Hogwarts to a great extent. We must alert the Order at once. This is not a time for complacency." Hermione's gaze lingered on the empty seat where Rita had been. She felt no triumph, only a cold dread. The spy was unmasked, but the damage was done. She suspected Lord Voldemort was already aware of their subterfuge, and she feared that Rita's capture might lead to terrible reprisals. Within days, the news broke across the wizarding world, ironically headlined in the Daily Prophet itself. Rita Skeeter, prominent reporter, arrested as Death Eater. The article was surprisingly subdued. Perhaps the editors were reeling from the revelation that their star columnist had been an agent of the Dark Lord. Wizarding society buzzed with reactions. Shock, horror, and in some circles, a smug sense of vindication that the infamous gossip had finally been undone. But the ramifications were far more severe within Hogwarts. Dumbledore convened an emergency assembly, warning the students that the infiltration was real and urging them to remain vigilant. Older students from the newly formed Defense Association stepped up their training routines, many shaken by the fact that an adult they had once deemed merely annoying was actually funneling intel to the greatest evil of their time. For Harry, Ron, and Hermione, the sense of violation lingered. Rita had targeted them personally for so long, but it was only now that they understood the depth of her betrayal. They tried not to imagine how many bits of private conversation, strategic plans, or heartfelt confessions had been relayed to the Dark Lord in the dead of night. In the corridors, rumors flew. Had Rita used unforgivable curses? Had she set traps for specific students? Some said she had a secret base of operations in Hogsmeade where she stored blackmail. Others claimed she was personally responsible for orchestrating smaller attacks on Muggle-born families. The only certainty was that the Dark Lord now knew more about Hogwarts' defenses and strategies than Dumbledore had ever suspected. A hush fell over the school. In classes, teachers hurried through lessons more seriously. A heaviness settled over the meals in the Great Hall. Everyone felt the tremors of looming darkness, the war that was no longer distant rumor but a pressing threat. Rita Skeeter's trial was scheduled at the Ministry of Magic's Wisingamot chambers. She arrived shackled, escorted by two stern-faced Aurors. The usual grandeur of the ministry, marble floors, golden fountains, was overshadowed by the tension crackling in the air. Reporters from the Quibbler and Wizard Weekly jostled to get a glimpse, ironically snapping photos of the formerly unscrupulous journalist. Among the Wisingamot members sat a few grim-faced witches and wizards who had once praised Rita's exposés. One was even rumored to have paid her for hush-hush stories on political rivals. Now they refused to meet her eye. Dumbledore observed from a high bench, flanked by McGonagall and Snape. Harry, Ron, and Hermione were seated as key witnesses, though they felt an odd swirl of emotions at the spectacle. Rita's defense was minimal. She tried to deny the mark, claiming it had been forced upon her. She insisted she was just doing her job, but the evidence was too substantial. Coded messages recovered from her office, testimonies from individuals she had blackmailed, the direct confrontation in the Forbidden Forest, and the mark that still darkened her arm. She sat in the cold stone chair in the center of the chamber, magical chains clinking. When the chief warlock stood to pronounce the verdict, the hush was absolute. Rita Skeeter, by unanimous vote of the Wisingamot, you have been found guilty of espionage, conspiracy, and aiding and abetting he who must not be named. You will be sentenced to a term in Azkaban prison. A shiver ran through the assembly. Azkaban was a fate that rivaled death. Rita's face went pale. Dementors would prowl the corridors, draining hope and happiness from the inmates, leaving only despair in their wake. No cunning words or illusions would soften that sentence. As she was led away, Rita's gaze locked on Hermione once more. Her lips curled into a venomous shape, but no words came out. Hermione shuddered, wondering if that was a silent curse or a final threat. Then the heavy doors closed, leaving behind the murmur of the Wisingamot. Weeks passed. Life at Hogwarts resumed a fragile normalcy. The Quidditch season continued. Classes pressed on. Yet a shadow loomed over every conversation, every laughter. Students talked in low voices, mindful of who might be listening. Professors locked classroom doors more often, doubling protective spells. One evening, Hermione found herself alone in the library again, reading through advanced defensive tomes. The winter term was nearly over, but the war was only beginning. Rita's infiltration had confirmed what Dumbledore had warned them about for years. Lord Voldemort was cunning and relentless, and his network of supporters existed in every corner of the wizarding world. Suddenly, Hermione caught her reflection in the window. She noticed how weary she looked, dark circles under her eyes from late nights of planning and worry. She remembered Rita's final, silent glare in the Wisingamot, felt as if the drama was far from finished. Footsteps approached. Harry and Ron stepped quietly into the library. Harry's voice was subdued. "Hermione, you all right?" She gave a small smile, shutting the thick tome. "Just thinking. About Skeeter?" Ron asked, hands in his pockets. Hermione exhaled softly. "Partly. It's such a betrayal. She was at every big event, every corridor, writing all those stories. All the while, she was feeding him everything." Harry nodded. I know, but at least she's gone now. Gone, Hermione echoed. But the war's just starting. She was only one of Voldemort's spies. For all we know, there are more. Ron shuffled uncomfortably. We'll deal with them. We've got to trust Dumbledore and the Order. Harry's green eyes gleamed with determination. And ourselves. We can't let fear break us. He placed a hand on Hermione's shoulder, another on Ron's. We do what we've always done. Stand together. A reassuring warmth spread through Hermione. Despite everything, the bond they shared was unbreakable. Rita Skeeter's betrayal, no matter how damaging, couldn't shatter that. In a small cell in Azkaban, Rita Skeeter sat hunched against the damp stone wall. The swirl of the sea winds and the distant echo of Dementors gliding through corridors made the air stale and suffocating. She clutched a piece of worn parchment that had once been her lifeblood, her skill, her craft, now worthless in this cheerless place. Every day, a cold dread gnawed at her mind. Memories of her glamorous office, her sparkling quills, the swirl of parties at the Daily Prophet's press galas felt distant and unreachable. Sometimes she couldn't recall her own words that once commanded so much power. If she concentrated, she could still feel the mark burning on her arm, a reminder of her allegiance to the Dark Lord. But he hadn't come for her. No rescue, no infiltration of Azkaban to free his prized informant. Perhaps she was expendable. The thought twisted in her gut like a blade. All her cunning, her devotion, her sacrifices, abandoned. Occasionally, she would overhear a guard mention new uprisings, rumored attacks orchestrated by Death Eaters on wizarding villages. Each piece of news was like a shard of glass, a reminder that the war raged on outside, and she was caged, powerless to influence its outcome. It stoked her fury and her despair in equal measure. At night, in the gloom, she would reimagine how things could have gone differently. Perhaps she should have stuck to sensational gossip rather than pledging fealty to the Dark Lord. Perhaps she should have accepted Hermione's ultimatum wholeheartedly. But regret was a cold comfort here. The Dementors glided, draining any fleeting sense of self-pity, leaving behind only emptiness. Sometimes, though, a flicker of her old defiance sparked inside her. If the Dark Lord triumphed, perhaps he would eventually break down Azkaban's walls and free her. She would be reinstated as his chief propagandist, spinning the New World Order to the wizarding public. She clung to that fantasy, letting it dull the reality of the prison's unending gloom. Back at Hogwarts, spring began to thaw the grounds. Crocuses and snowdrops poked through the last remnants of frost, and a hopeful breeze drifted through the corridors. Though the menace of Voldemort was ever present, the castle pulsed with a quiet determination to resist. In Defense Association meetings, Harry, Hermione, and Ron guided their peers through complex spellwork. They taught Patronus charms, shield charms, and dueling tactics. The energy in these sessions was electric. Everyone was aware that they trained not just for grades, but for survival. Hermione found new depth to her sense of purpose. The infiltration by Rita Skeeter had rattled the entire school, but it also galvanized them. People who once shrugged off the threat began to realize that the enemy was cunning, embedded in the very fabric of their society. One late afternoon, as she left a training session, Hermione passed by the staff room. Through the open door, she saw Dumbledore and McGonagall discussing security enhancements. She caught the phrase, increased wards and ministry cooperation. Overhearing their calm, serious tones, she felt a surge of confidence. No matter how cunning Voldemort's spies were, Hogwarts had its guardians. Ron sidled up beside her, wiping sweat from his brow. Looks like the staff is on high alert again. Harry joined them, glancing at the staff room. After Rita, I can't blame them. If she could slip in, who else might be trying? Hermione gave a firm nod. At least we're no longer flying blind. This time, we know infiltration can come from the most unexpected directions. That's an advantage, in a way. We'll be ready. The trio walked on, footsteps echoing in the corridor. They would carry the scars of betrayal for a long time, but they also carried a renewed resolve. The confrontation with Rita Skeeter and the revelation of her Death Eater ties had shown them how high the stakes truly were, and how vital their unity was in the fight ahead. Months later, after news of more skirmishes and the grim expansion of Death Eater activity, one small detail circulated among the wizarding community: rumors that Rita Skeeter had lost her mind in Azkaban. Some said the Dementors had left her a hollow shell, incapable of stringing together coherent sentences. Others whispered that she scratched her stories into the walls with broken fingernails, an endless scribble of coded nonsense. For Hermione, Ron, and Harry, these rumors evoked a mix of pity and relief. They had thwarted one of Voldemort's inside agents, but the war was hardly over. Even so, a certain quiet comfort accompanied the knowledge that one of the biggest threats from within, Rita's ability to twist truths and feed the enemy valuable secrets, had been neutralized. Out in the world, however, battles loomed. Voldemort's name was spoken in fearful whispers, and each day brought fresh challenges. Yet the wizarding community, emboldened by the exposure of traitors like Rita Skeeter, was beginning to close ranks. New alliances formed, old feuds were set aside in the face of a greater evil. The seeds of resistance were sown in solidarity and mutual trust. And at Hogwarts, night by night, the Great Hall glowed with steadfast resolve. Students and teachers shared meals, stories, and the occasional laugh, forging bonds of friendship strong enough to weather the storms. In the flicker of candles, one could almost imagine a brighter future, one where quills and parchments would no longer be weapons of fear and betrayal, but instruments of learning and unity. For now, though, the echoes of Rita's cunning lingered. The castle would never forget how easily a single, cleverly disguised quill could pierce its defenses. But the castle would also remember how a few brave friends, guided by trust and truth, unmasked that treachery and stood firm in the face of darkness. In the end, Rita Skeeter's legacy was a stark warning. Even the smallest insect, if allied with evil, can carry poison deep into the heart of the mightiest stronghold. Yet that same stronghold, united in purpose, could withstand such infiltration, and grow stronger, more vigilant, and more determined to protect what it cherished most. And somewhere in a dark cell, a once famous journalist who had chosen to be a harbinger of the Dark Lord was left with her greatest regret: that she had so underestimated the resilience of Hogwarts, the unwavering loyalty of its defenders, and the unbreakable power of truth.